back, and it's March.
Is it March?
Third podcast of the year.
Right, 2013.
And boy, have we got an exciting one. Let's try to oversell it straight away.
You're really overselling it. We have, this is going to be top.
Yeah, this is going to be the best podcast we do this month.
Yeah, excellent. Right, shall we?
Yeah, we've got a new David Bowie album, of course. New album from How to Destroy Angels. New album from Laura, or first album, in fact, by Laura Umvula. Latest album from Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. The alleged first solo album by Johnny Marr, and the latest album by Bon Jovi.
No.
So without further ado, let's get into the one that's currently sat astride the #1 spot on the UK album charts, the return of Mr. Bowie.
David Bowie. Who would have thought we'd be reviewing a David Bowie album a year ago, or even 3 months ago?
Yeah, it's like before Christmas, in fact. Yeah.
Often we've joked and talked about, is he ever going to release that album? And lo and behold, here it is. In fact, there's a copy of it right here on my desk.
Yes.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Where to begin? It's just absolutely fabulous that he's released a new album. It's one of those things you think. I really did begin to think, particularly after the Olympic closing ceremony, when there was all that hoo-ha about whether he would appear or not. I really did begin to think at that point he's never actually going to come out of retirement. That in fact he has really, really given up on the 21st century, which I thought was an absolute shame. But lo and behold, that January morning, not that long ago, we got a very frail-sounding Bowie on Where Are We Now? And of course, that was a smokescreen because vocally speaking, he's just as strong as he's ever been.
Yes, and that's probably the most reflective and potentially one of the most uncommercial tracks on the album. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
ideal first single.
Again, it's just genius. It's just genius. There's a lot been said, so I'm going to keep it succinct, hopefully. I felt that this album was very much a greatest hits in terms of themes of Bowie.
Yes,
yeah,
I tend to agree.
It had elements of Ziggy. It had elements of the sort of later, the low period Berlin trilogy. There was even a little bit of Tin Machine in there to keep you happy, and ever so slight dusting of Outside on one of the tracks as well. A lot of the critics in the music press have actually used this album as an opportunity to big up Bowie and say this is absolutely genius and brilliant, and also have a slight pop a couple of those albums I just mentioned, which I think is very unfair, because I think he does a lot of self-referential in various tracks on here. So much so that I actually thought Dancing Out in Space was a parody of Bowie.
Yeah, almost a kind of modern love type.
Yeah, exactly.
Thing. Although it kind of starts with the kind of it's almost a Motown Can't Hurry Love kind of beat start to it.
Yeah, I'm going to stick my neck even further out and say I don't actually think this is his best album in the last 10 years. All right, 12 years, just to cover the period I'm talking about. It's a great album. And it's so nice to have him back, but I just felt that it doesn't quite hang together as a collection of songs.
I agree and disagree with what you say. I think it does hang together quite well, but bizarrely in that kind of greatest hits.
Yeah, that's what
type way. It's like it's like because he's been away for 10 years.
Yeah,
this is like his greatest hits of the last 10 years.
Yes,
and he's produced that on an album. So there's no one overriding theme of the album musically. It's all very distinctly Bowie. Obviously.
Oh, very much so.
From the opening track of Next Day, with its hints of fashion and scary monsters, and almost kind of Tom Waits-esque following track Dirty Boys, And you've got various, as you say, there are various hints at Ziggy, there are hints at Outside, Tin Machine. I did read one review, actually, of this album that said, started, even as a die-hard Bowie fan, in brackets, I'll even forgive him Tin Machine. At which I was going to go, what do you mean forgive him Tin Machine?
Our first album's great.
It is great, yeah. I don't tire of saying it. The first album is a fantastic record. But I think lyrically it's a really interesting album as well. He's kind of like decided to focus more almost on the lyrics, and they're less abstract than we've grown to love, I suppose, from Bowie's. There's in that opening track, Next Day, there's the great line, "Here I am, not quite dying," which I really like, which is a kind of medieval, history-inspired kind of song. And then you've got Valentine's Day, which is this nice upbeat kind of bouncy thing, which is about a kind of school mass murderer type thing. There's a couple of songs about war, Feel So Lonely You Could Die, and what's the other one? How Does the Grass Grow, is it?
Yeah.
And How Does the Grass Grow is good as well, because it has him kind of humming Apache in the middle of it as well, which is quite nice. And yeah, I've listened to this album more times than the others, so I apologise to all the other artists we're reviewing today. This one has got many more plays. And I found myself doing what I sometimes do when I'm making notes for this podcast, which is putting one tick next to something if I really, really like it. And on this album, I've got one tick next to pretty much the whole album.
Wow.
I don't think there's actually a dud track on it.
No.
And it's already the album to beat for me this year. It's set the marker.
And I entirely agree. It is a great album. My point stands that because it's different, it's the different themes. I mean, I am splitting hairs a little bit, I must admit. It's the sort of the greatest hits.
No, it's good. Someone's got it, because everyone's been more of my kind of accusing Tony about it. So
and everyone's just fallen over themselves and said, "Oh, this is brilliant." Of course, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. He's back. It's just that I just felt that there are certain elements of previous albums. And I mean, I like Outside. Okay, not many people do.
Yeah, you and me, I think. I think it's just me.
It's just us two.
It's just me that likes the Tin Machine album, and you and me that like Outside.
So you'll probably appreciate where I'm coming from. You're absolutely right, though. There isn't a dud track on it, so we really are sort of splitting hairs. This is probably the album to beat for the rest of this year.
Yeah, I'm willing to predict now that I'll be very surprised if this is not in my top 5 come the end of the year.
Yeah.
However, I'm probably not going to say the same about our next album,
right?
How to Destroy Angels, Welcome Oblivion,
right?
Which is a Trent Reznor project.
Yep.
With his erstwhile collaborator Atticus Ross, somebody, the bloke who I can't remember the name of, and Mrs. Trent Reznor, whose name is Mary Queen Mandique.
Yep.
Mandique.
That's it.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Now, this I think the problems with this album and the strong points of this album are both kind of the same thing, which is it sounds too much like Nin, and too much like Nin outtakes, the soundtrack that's outtakes. So thinking, we've got a couple of tracks left and the soundtracks that wouldn't fit on, let's just throw them on here, let's get my wife to kind of warble a bit over the top of them. And, it's... Yeah, and lots of... I would describe this album to someone that hasn't heard any of the music as plink, plonk, kaplunk, blip, blop, kaplunk. And it sounds brilliant, as in the sound, very clean. As Almonda produced it, I think.
Yeah.
So the actual sound itself is very, very crisp, perfect sounding. But like I said, for me, there's some great tracks on it, and even examples of what I was just complaining about are things like the loop closes. Near the end of the album, which is a perfect example of the soundtrack reject kind of thing.
Yeah, very much so, that particular track. Yeah.
And even the track before it, Recursive Self-Improvement, similar kind of thing. And then you've got things that are slightly more ninny, if you like, near the start, and at times it kind of threatens to be really interesting. So on tracks like Ice Age, which is a more kind of acoustic-y kind of track, which actually reminded me a lot of the album we reviewed last year by the SoundClouder people, Sandman's Orchestra.
Oh yeah,
had that kind of thing about it. And then...
Was that last year?
Yeah. And then... I think it was last year.
Yes.
And then... it might have been the year before, actually.
It might have been the year before.
God. I think they've got a new album coming out, so it might have been the year before. And also, in the middle of the album, you have Too Late, All Gone, and How Long. And How Long, which is the current single, is very kind of Depeche Mode-y.
Yeah.
But also much poppier and showcases her better. And I would have actually preferred to have an album that was more kind of distinctly non-Nin soundtracky thing, but with her her singing and trying to go in a slightly different direction, and that track does that a bit. Like I thought, whilst this is poppier, an actual album full of stuff that was leaning more this way, I'd have actually found more interesting.
It's quite mainstream. It's interesting. That was the lead single. If you exclude the EP that came out at the tail end of last year, which I think all of which is included here as well.
Yes.
It's. I thought the opening of the album was quite strong. It's very, very Nin, the wake up, that sort of brief sort of collection of noise and distortion at the start, which goes into Keep It Together, which was the lead off the Omen EP from tail end of last year. And then, you're right, it does start to meander a little bit. I'm a big Nin fan, so there's probably elements of this I really enjoyed that perhaps you didn't, for some of the reasons you've just described. In that I thought when it was sounding like Nin, it was playing to the strengths. And actually, when you compare this collection of tracks, 13, 14 tracks, to the EP that came back in 2010, which is now 3 years ago. This is a lot stronger, and it's almost they have crafted.
I would certainly agree with that, because that was pretty cool.
Yeah. So and for those of you who purchase this via iTunes or stream it on Spotify, it's actually included at the end as well, which sort of doubles the length of the album.
Yes. As if the 65 minutes wasn't long enough already.
You can have that. You can have the whole hour and a half. So I agree with some of what you say. Where I found it plays to its strengths is when you hear the both of them as well. I actually don't mind hearing Trent Reznor. It actually feels like we've not heard him for quite a long time because of the soundtrack work, because of the Ghosts work that he did before that. As I exclude the last album that they did there as well. So it's nice to hear him as well. I think it was it We Fade Away, where there was a very early Nin effect on the vocals with her sort of screaming but whispering, which I quite like. There's a little nod to Nin there, which I quite enjoyed.
It's also hard not to start singing Fade to Grey at part of the time in that song as well.
Quite. So, and I agree with you. The end of the album does start to lose interest, because it does seem to just go on and on and on in the manner of some of the weaker points of the recent soundtrack.
Yes, most of the tracks are over 6 minutes long, people. Yes.
So you need a sturdy constitution and probably will appeal more to existing fans rather than new believers. However, I enjoyed it. I think it warrants another couple of listens at least. Like you said at the start, I probably spent too much time listening to David Bowie this month, and than I should have done. So it's a good album. It's certainly not a solid album. It does feel like a collection of things thrown together, and that's the other weakness in it. Because I've already heard the Omen EP, for example, which is about 6 tracks on here. Because we've already heard the single, The other bits that slotted in between, it starts to feel like, well, there's a few stronger tracks there, there's a bit of filler, there's a few more strong tracks there. So it doesn't have that cohesion.
Good word.
Thank you.
So, moving on, we have a debut album from a lady that we spoke about on the first podcast of this year, because she was number 2 in the BBC's kind of ones to watch for this year. And we both said at the time that we were both surprised by her voice and that we would be looking forward to her debut release. So, what did you think?
I thought this is a beautiful record.
I agree. It's a lovely record.
It was so nice. The focus being on beforehand, I actually did listen to this on more than 2 occasions. And it was such a lovely record just to put on and listen to. And I'm not saying put on in the background and listen to, because we've thrown that criticism at albums before. But no,
to actually sit back
and it takes you off to a place which is a very sunny, warm and cosy place. Her vocals, and I think I said this when we reviewed the EP earlier this year, are very ethereal at times.
Yeah.
And very comforting. And some of the use of sounds, the use of orchestra, the use of the sort of brass instruments in there as well, nods to the 60s.
Yes, which I think we mentioned before, particularly on things like Is There Anybody Out There and stuff like that, when you've got the kind of almost Beach Boys-esque kind of harmony vocals.
Are very, very, very good. Sing to the Moon, it was just such a beautiful track.
Well, it's one of those ones, there's a couple like that on the album that are very much builders. That's one of the things I like about, as you're saying, about the instrumentation. It's quite amazing how quite a few of the tracks, they kind of start with just kind of very minimal sound of maybe just her voice, and then gradually you get kind of maybe the bass coming in and then the drums coming in, and the song slowly kind of, it's almost like someone's painting the song.
Yeah, that's it. That's absolutely it. And on some of the livelier numbers as well, there's sort of a bit of an acid jazz thing thrown in there as well, just for good measure, just to keep the beat going.
Oh, stuff like That's Alright.
Yeah,
that's
all right. Brilliant foot tapper.
As is Green Garden, which I can't stop kind of humming. Practically, I was walking around the house the other day going, ooh ah, ooh ah, ooh. It sounds better on the album.
That's right, kids. Father, again, a really beautiful song. I can't use any other word to describe this other than beautiful. It was just such a pleasure to listen to this album. And I'm trying to contrast it to sort of contemporaries so if you've not heard this lady, who you might compare it to.
Well, you can.
I'm really struggling.
I think you have to go back. I think a few people when we were looking at her at the start of the year made comparisons to Nina Simone, and I think that's probably as good a comparison as you're going to get, because she has got that kind of warmth and depth to her voice that is particularly shown off on some of the kind of simple piano-based songs like Father, Father, and Diamonds at the end of the album as well, which really bring out. I mean, the album is, it's about her voice. Everything else is almost kind of secondary to that. But thankfully, there's good quality songs on here to back it up. So it's not just a good voice and you're thinking, well, shame them and wrote a decent track.
No, the songwriting and the instrumentation is superb. One final thought from me, in terms of a contemporary sound, not quite contemporary nowadays, but 07. You remember them?
I do remember 07.
So there was that whole chill out phase at the start of the century, There's an element of that in here too.
Yeah, I can see that. And tell you what I thought, and I only thought this lunchtime when I was listening to this album again, but I got to the end, I kind of thought I could also see her doing a Bond.
Yes! No, I had the same thought yesterday. Yeah, I can see if the next Bond film doesn't go to Emily Sandé, because it probably will, because everything does. Yes, absolutely. There, in some of the livelier numbers, there is an element of the bassy in there.
Yeah,
and I think there's a Bond theme in this girl. If someone can craft it, it would be a beautiful Bond theme as well.
I mean, she got a song called Diamonds, for God's sake.
Yeah, quite.
Halfway there already. Right, moving on to an album that actually pace-wise, probably stays the same. The latest album from Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Push Away the Sky, 15th studio album. And this comes after 3 more upbeat records, I suppose, because you had the 2 Grinderman albums and Dig Lazarus Dig.
Oh, yeah.
Which were all very much front foot, in your face kind of Nick Cave albums. Whereas this is very much a more laid back, quiet, introspective almost record. It's also the shortest record that we've reviewed.
Is it?
This podcast as well.
Right.
It comes in at about 40 minutes.
Oh.
So it's like a good old-fashioned album. In fact, speaking of, look, it's a good old-fashioned album.
Have you got it? Oh, wow. Scott's pointing to a vinyl copy, propping up the wall.
No, you can actually see the proper picture of his missus on that as well, rather than the slightly rather than the slightly blurry version that's on everything else.
Oh gosh, I hadn't. Obviously, on the slightly blurry version that most people will see nowadays, I hadn't noticed that. Oh, she's naked.
Yeah, she is. Anyway, similarly to funny enough, with the Laura Umvula thing, I could actually also imagine her doing a duet with Nick Cave. Strangely enough. Particularly when Cave's in this kind of mood, because like I said, it is a very much quite a sparse record that again is more about atmosphere and it's ballad based, it has to be said. I think it gets off to a great start with We Know Who You Are, which is just a cracking opening track, and goes into Wide Lovely Eyes, which was the thing that particularly got me thinking about Laura Umvula again, because it has some great vocal harmonies in the chorus when I was thinking, I could just imagine her kind of coming in, kind of harmonising with him on that kind of thing. And then the other album, the rest of the album, you've got a mixture of kind of almost straight ballads, if you like, if that's the right word to use. So things really good like Mermaids, which is one of my favourite tracks on the album, and the title track, Push the Sky Away. Yeah. Which is almost kind of Scott Walker-esque.
Yeah, agree.
Which I actually didn't mention on the Bowie album, obviously, because the final track on the Bowie album is very
Scott Walker.
Yeah. And then you got, quite amusingly, you've got a song called Jubilee Street, and then you've got a song they wrote about writing Jubilee Street. Yes. Which is the ultimate lazy songwriting, surely. I've written a song called Jubilee Street. I'm then going to write a song called Finishing Jubilee Street, which explains how I wrote the song, which I thought was actually quite funny.
It was hilarious.
And also, how can you not like an album that has a song called Higgs Boson Blues on it?
Yeah.
Which is one of the few times when the album gets slightly louder.
Yeah.
But it's probably the only even vaguely loud moment on an album that is, like I said, very much a kind of relaxed record. Yeah. And again, it's the kind of thing that you could quite easily have on coming after the Laura Umvula album whilst you're sitting there just chilling.
Yeah, I completely agree. Nick Cave's chill out album. I was trying to remember which one it was. It was Grinderman 2, I think, was the last one we possibly looked at.
I think so, yeah.
On this podcast. But in complete contrast, I think, to what you'd expect a Nick Cave or a recent Nick Cave album to sound like. Very, very nice record to listen to, very comfortable. Again, I'm wrapping myself in blankets in this podcast. As you say, the opening track in particular was a little instrumentation or a synth or something right at the very, very start, the first few notes of the album, which just hooked me immediately.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
You know, it just sort of drew you in, and a bit like the Laura Umvula album, the track's built around just little things like that, and it didn't have the bombast and blast of the usual sort of the Bad Seeds sound.
Yes.
You know, so a very enjoyable record to listen to again. Gosh. And the first release on the Pet Shop Boys' new label.
Oh.
Which was the other news that shocked me this month as well.
Well, it shocked me to hear they were releasing another record, because I thought, look, I've only just reviewed one. I can't be about to have to do it again.
Yeah, no, they actually cited this one album in the press release as a success that they're obviously looking to emulate.
Oh, there you go. It'll probably be mentioned on the back then.
There you go. Yeah.
So, we now move on to a Smith.
Yep. A wordsmith or a guitar smith?
Yes, both. allegedly now. And bizarrely, the supposed first solo album from Johnny Marr called The Messenger. Well, I was sure he did an album, Johnny Marr and the Healers.
Johnny Marr and the Healers, yeah.
That was essentially a solo album.
That was pretty much a solo album.
I mean, admittedly, he'd throw on Healers to get around it, but he never really had the band was never really a band. And besides that, he's also done time in the Cribs and Modest Mouse.
Modest Mouse. He is the, as someone amusingly called him recently, the former guitarist in Modest Mouse. He's been there for a while.
He wasn't there for a while, yeah. And so this is his first solo record. I'll let him off with it. What the hell?
Yeah.
So he's almost. He must be 50 now. Was it worth the wait for his first solo album?
I have to say, to begin with, I was disappointed with this record. I just found that at the start he was trying to emulate a very much. Oh, this is going to sound terrible. It's the rock star growing old disgracefully sound. You know, trying to relive some of the glories of youth. Very brash to begin with as well. Not what you'd expect from that sort of clean sounding Johnny Marr on guitar, you know. So I have to say, the first half of this album, I was quite disappointed. I didn't enjoy it at all. Then something just clicked. I don't know if it was me or the record, but the second half of the LP, suddenly that sort of rawness, that sort of brashness, sort of came together and was refined, and it all came together in a good way. And I have to say, I enjoyed, certainly by the time we get to tracks such as Sun and Moon and The Cracker in particular, I thought it's just classic Johnny Marr.
Well, they're certainly very, both those tracks are very Smiths-like musically.
Yeah. And strains of electronic as well, I suppose.
Yeah. And I've had in Sun and Moon, he does his One Morrissey impersonation where he sings the line "Habit" now in a very much in a Morrissey style voice.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know. Maybe this is sort of getting accustomed to actually hearing Johnny Marr rather than hearing Johnny Marr, if you know what I mean, at the start of the album. Again, like some of his contemporaries from Manchester, seems to have developed an American accent on record, and I'm thinking of the Charlatans. Not quite contemporaries, but you know what I mean. So I found, as I say, the first half of the album a little unsettling, but once it found its groove, actually it was a blistering record.
So I actually didn't mind the first half of the album.
Oh, there you go. That's the rock pop split.
Yeah. I can't agree. Overall, I think the album is, to use your favourite word, solid.
Yeah.
And so I actually think it's not a bad record. I'm better than I was expecting it to be perfectly honest. So it has the elements of the Smiths in some of the tracks. So a couple of tracks you just mentioned, also The Messenger, the title track, and European Me, which is actually one of the earlier tracks, also have that distinct kind of Smiths guitar style. But like you said, elsewhere on the record, I suppose because he's been playing other stuff and this stuff, the influences are slightly wider. Slightly perplexingly, the influences on a couple of tracks seem to me to be The Mission.
Right.
So I Want a Heartbeat, which is the second track on the album, seemed to owe more to the Sisters of Mercy and The Mission, as did, say, Demesne, which, again, I was sat... Whilst I actually think that song is actually one of the best tracks on the album, I was sat there thinking... See Wayne Hussey singing this. Elsewhere, I had this really weird thing happen when I was listening to this record, which kind of started about Upstarts and Lockdown, and then came back right at the end of the album, where he does the kind of Franz Ferdinand track.
Yes.
We all start to attack. But on all these
Wasn't it just?
On all these three tracks, he just really reminded me, and you won't get this because it's definitely an age thing and a Kiss thing. But back in 78, all the original members of Kiss released solo albums. So Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, Peter Criss, and Ace Frehley. And Ace Frehley was the guitarist. And on Upstarts particularly, and Lockdown, it just sounds ridiculously like listening to Ace Frehley and an Ace Frehley record. And particularly on that album, Ace Frehley did a cover of the song Back in the New York Groove. And this just has that kind of feel about it. I'm probably the only person that's going to listen to this album that's going to be thinking, ooh, Ace Frehley of Kiss. I'm sure Johnny Marr will really appreciate that reference.
His 78 incarnation.
Yeah, his 78 reincarnation. Actually, Ace Frehley is not a bad guitarist, so Johnny Marr perhaps wouldn't be that upset with me mentioning that. But it was the weird thing that the thing that popped into my head halfway through this album was Ace Frehley of Kiss solo album from 78.
Okay, that must be a first.
It is, yes. But yeah, overall, an album I could quite happily listen to.
Yeah, agreed.
And much better than a lot of the so-called, indie rock type records we've forced ourselves to listen to in the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. That goes without saying. Also, a lot better than some of the, it's hardly a comeback, but some of the sort of solo projects that we've also listened to over the last couple of years, where a well-known personality within an existing band or structure has appeared with a solo record.
Yeah. You won't mention names.
No.
So that just leaves us with the number 2 album in the UK this week.
Oh, I see what's happened there.
Which is the 12th studio album from Bon Jovi called What About Now? Now, yeah.
What about now?
What about now, indeed, yeah. I don't want to be another wave upon the ocean. I just thought I'd share that with you, Pete. This is actually genuinely hard for me because I bought the first five Bon Jovi albums.
Yeah.
And I've bought Bon Jovi albums since as well. I actually bought, I think the last ones I bought. Actually, Nice Day and Lost Highway albums I quite liked. However, the last album, the studio album, The Circle, was a bit crap. And sad to say, for me, What About Now is kind of continuing that trend. And it's sadly quite unimaginative, kind of autopilot corporate rock.
Mm.
But we're still, with a couple of exceptions, particularly on the kind of upbeat tracks, which are, have always been their staple kind of stuff, even lacking that killer chorus, which you could always kind of rely on. A prime example of this is, for those people who occasionally follow our Twitter account, I occasionally do one-off little single reviews. Twitter account is at CTTB Music. And the opening track of this album, Because We Can, came out a few weeks back. And I said, along the lines of, God, this is crap. However, I'll probably be singing the chorus tomorrow. I wasn't. However, I have been singing the chorus today. Proof that it eventually does wear you down. And the I don't want to be another wave upon the ocean is part of that said chorus. And it is so bad and so annoying that it does eventually wear you down. However, the rest of the album doesn't even get that good. You've got Pictures of You, which starts with I feel just like Picasso, and you're thinking, oh God, no. But that isn't even the worst of it. That's what water made me. What the is that even about? I'm sorry. I've listened to that track 3 times now, and I'm still thinking, what? But that's still better than Army of Wank, which is it's Bon Jovi doing an impersonation of the Killers, doing an impersonation of Bon Jovi.
Yeah.
They even say Soldier the same way as Killers do it.
Brandon Flowers.
And it's truly, truly dreadful. However, I'm going to say...
I can see your face getting redder and redder. For the listeners, he's getting very angry.
But I want to say some positive things. Bizarrely, when they decide to go all acoustic, which they do on a couple of tracks, it's actually not that bad. So Amen, which is the 5th track on the album, acoustic ballad kind of thing, perfectly fine.
Is that the Green Day song?
Don't think it's quite that one, but yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah. And there's another acoustic song somewhere else on the album as well, which actually isn't that bad.
Yeah.
which I think actually is The Fighter, right at the end of the album.
That's all right.
Yeah, which is actually not, which is probably the standout track on the album for me.
Yeah.
And bizarrely, if you listen to the extra tracks that come with this album, you've got a further few acoustic tracks, which are better than a lot of the stuff that's actually made it to the record, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So it's disappointing, just as an album. If I didn't like at least some of Bon Jovi's back catalogue, but I also think it's disappointing as an album, even if you take into account. 'Cause like I say, it just seems to be missing, any kind of inventiveness. Yeah, it's can't really put the kind of what I really mean into words.
No, I don't think you can. I'm a casual Bon Jovi listener. I'm aware of some of their more recent stuff, and to be honest with you, I probably didn't find this as offensive as you clearly did, but I did just find it bland. It's very middle of the road, and if you like your middle of the road rock, and you really don't mind your middle of the road rock, and I'm not saying it to be derogatory, then you'll probably enjoy this album. It's a great one just to put on in the car and just go for a long drive, literally middle of the road.
Like Nickelback, you might like this.
Yeah, well, quite. The one thing I would pull up is the opposite of what you said, is the ballads. I think we reviewed Aerosmith's album last year.
Oh yeah, that was.
And that was a ballad every 4 tracks, wasn't it? And I felt this one. I felt that just as it was getting somewhere, everything had just sort of slowed down. And we'd have another ballad, and I find that personally frustrating. You actually highlighted that some of the better tracks on here are albums. I just felt that the album lost some of its pace. So, from me, I can't really add much to what you've said as a casual listener, except it is a very sort of bland record. It's not that one that I'll listen to again, to be honest.
No. So.
I got to number 2 though.
Yeah.
And if it hadn't been for Bowie, it'd be number 1.
Album of the podcast?
Bowie.
Yeah. I'll say that, even though it's
I mean, it's obviously it's Bowie, but Laura Umvula.
Yeah, yes, I'd agree. I think had Bowie not released the album, then it would have been toss up for me between Laura Umvula and Nick Cave, and I would certainly recommend people book both of those anyway.
Yeah, I was just thinking. My final thought on the Bon Jovi record. Insight, folks, into the production methods here. We almost reviewed the Palmer Violets album. Really wish we had.
Maybe next time. In fact, until next time. Back to the day.
Check out our website at cttbmusic.co.uk. Also, follow us on Twitter at cttbmusic. The CTTB Music Podcast is a Vineland production.